Hello there, I'm filmmaker Matthew Baumgartner. Today, we go back to the fall of 1962 to examine an event that would have resulted in 200 million lives lost if it did not go to plan. Today, we go back to the Cuban Missile Crisis. Come join me on this trip back in time. After the failed Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba in 1961, and after a U-2 American spy plane discovered a nuclear missile facility and a few intermediate nuclear missiles on the island of Cuba, American relations with the Cuban dictator Fidel Castro fell into a detrimental state of fear and mistrust.
Today we're talking with Major Rudolph Anderson of the U.S. Air Force, who last week flew a number of missions over Cuba. Major Anderson, would you mind sharing what you saw during your flight missions?
Well, what I can share with you is I was over Cuba and I noticed several irregularities in a military base. I was there and I took hundreds of pictures, and that information is now with military intelligence. So,
thank you, Major Anderson.
Thank you. The Cuban dictator Fidel Castro felt that after the Bay of Pigs invasion, that his nation's safety was at stake. As a response, he went to the Soviet Union and successfully convinced Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev to send missiles via ship to their nation. To deter these missiles, President of the United States John F. Kennedy gave orders to set up a naval blockade around Cuba, demanding that no more missiles are sent to Cuba and that the ones already there are dismantled. Now, let's take a look at a CBS newscast from 1962 describing Kennedy's blockade. Good evening and welcome to the CBS News. I'm Walter Cronkite. Today, on October 22nd, White House and State Department spokesmen insist that the quarantine ordered by President Kennedy is not an act of war and not a regular blockade. Although they admit in their words, it does have elements of a blockade in a procedural sense. The spokesperson says, "We are going to stop ships of all nations to see if they carry offensive weapons. The ships are going to be asked to stop. Now, if the ships are unwilling to stop or turn around, they will be fired upon by the U.S. military." That's all we have tonight. Be sure to tune in at 11 to see more news regarding what's going on in Cuba. Thank you. Initially, the Soviet Union took Kennedy's naval blockade as an act of war and withheld all nuclear weapons delivery. However, with the negotiating of Kennedy offering to take U.S. missiles out of Turkey, war was avoided and the Soviet ships taking missiles to Cuba were turned around. The Cuban Missile Crisis is considered to be a successful portion of Kennedy's presidential career and resulted in the Moscow to Washington hotline to be set up to help facilitate better communication to avoid nuclear war. The crisis, however, was far less successful for Fidel Castro, as he wanted both the closure of the U.S. naval base out of Guantanamo Bay and for the U.S. to cease spy plane flight over Cuba. Both of these demands were never considered by both the U.S. or the Soviets. To Cuba, the crisis showed that the Soviets cared more about avoiding war with the U.S. rather than protecting their own allies. Now, I hope you enjoyed that look back of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now, not only did this event avoid nuclear war, it also had many long-term benefits, including: number one, it showed the two world superpowers at the time that diplomacy is a good alternative to conflict. Number two, it led to a number of treaties that eventually banned the above-ground nuclear testing. And number three, it led to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty that banned the selling of nuclear weapons from one country to another. Well, I hope you enjoyed this documentary. Thank you so much for watching.